Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of TNMCoaching Unplugged and Zoran Todorovic Interconnected podcast, where we explore the human side of leadership, transformation, and growth. I'm very grateful and happy that you're liking us, you're loving us. Our podcast is growing, you're sharing with your colleagues. We have received very positive feedbacks in last month podcast. So I'm really grateful to entire community for being here with us, listening, tuning in. Today we have a beautiful guest that I have great pleasure in speaking with, Sanjiv Patel. He's a transformational leadership strategist, life coach, resilience mentor, whose life's work is to help people, leaders, heal, grow, and lead with authenticity. Over past 3 decades, Sanjiv has guided countless leaders to transformation and uncertainty as well, which is something big in our life right now. Everybody's uncertain, everybody's worried. How are we going to manage this future? From boardrooms to personal training, using his signature models, which is HEALS, and then 3R approaches to resilience. Today, his company brings together wisdom of his own life experience. And this is what I love when people are teaching from their own life experience, for their own authenticity, including momentums of deep losses, reinvention. He's helping others to cultivate and grow their leadership skills. He has worked with the companies like Microsoft, Citi, BT, HNS, and so on and so forth. He also had a wonderful talk on TEDx that I advise you to see. You can Google it, you can find it there. So Sanjiv, welcome to TNM Coaching Unplugged. It's a true pleasure to having you with me today. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm great. Thank you so much for that gushing introduction. I don't know what to say, but I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on your podcast. I've listened to many episodes and it really resonates with who I am and the way I operate. So thank you.
Yeah, so great. And always for me, I mean, we start with the personal hero's journey question because most of our leaders who are listening, the conscious leaders, the HR professionals, the self-employed people, even coaches and mentors, they're always curious about you being with us today. So my first question to you is like, what experiences in your life led you to decide to work with leadership and resilience? What happened in your life journey that kind of guided you in that niche?
So first of all, I have to say, I'm that child who didn't fit in. So, from a young age, I came from an immigrant family, came as a baby boy, older brother who just happened to fit in at the right age into the system, whereas I was always the one who was the afterthought and how do we make this work? I struggled to find my meaning, my purpose. I ended up studying something that my traditional father insisted that we all had to do to get ahead in life. I ended up doing a degree which I hated from a reputable university. And I found myself at the end of that journey feeling like a failure. I walked away with a really disappointing grade. I struggled to get through every single year. But at the end, that moment in time, I did a real reset because I was being measured and I was chasing somebody else's standards and somebody else's vision and drive. And I decided that looking inside myself, I knew I had the ability. But the best I could do was show up as the best version of me each day. And so from that day onwards, I started to progress on my journey. Through that journey, I became a successful wealth manager. And through that, I got to a phase where I was kind of bored. And I wanted to expand my mind and the opportunities. And I did what the classic people do. They go and do an MBA at one of the top business schools. Now, this is where the resilience story and where I shaped this journey. I never thought of myself as a leadership coach in those days. I was just trying to pursue a title, something that would give me the status, the wealth that everybody chases. I got headhunted by somebody with an opportunity for an amazing business. At a time of deregulation on telecoms in the UK, I saw this opportunity to grow something nationally, internationally, and tick those boxes inside. Those ego boxes, the things that people traditionally chase. Along that journey, it was super exciting, but I learned more about myself and more about the world of business and people than I ever learned anywhere else in my life. Although I come from a spiritual background, which also grounds my learning and my approach. Zoran, we went through turbulent times in this business, but we got to a stage where everything lined up, the stars lined up. 3 of us founding partners, directors, were set in a place where we could grow as much as we wanted to grow. We found an acquisition partner who would work with our model. And basically, the future was set. And I was thinking all of that time, those years, this has come to the culmination. This is what it's about. But this is where it changed. One of the founding directors took me for a walk one lunchtime, and he said, Sanjiv, you and I make this thing tick. I think we need to restructure this business. I have an investor, a very influential investor who wants to come into the company. And at this stage, we need to eject the third director partner. And I went, doesn't work that way with me. We don't need the money, first of all. And secondly, we came on this journey together. Whatever we've done or not done, we're on this journey together. We left it at that. A couple of days later, it took me for another walk, opened up the level of persuasion, said, listen, I've drawn up contracts, employment contracts for me and you, which are six-figure sums with all the benefits. You sign mine, I sign yours. All that you have to agree to is that investment money comes in and the shareholding of this third partner goes directly to the investor. And I said, well, firstly, I don't understand that equation. What about the money for the third partner? He said, well, he walks away with nothing. He's worth nothing. He's done nothing. And that was a really crucial point in my journey where I went, that doesn't work. He said, big businesses do it this way. I've been in businesses for so long. This is Sanjay. This is how big boys work. He was built on the board of many big corporates globally. But I stuck to my guns. The consequence of which was he tried everything he could to bring the business down. Poison emails to our suppliers. We had our banks freezing the bank account because there was a director's dispute. And however right you are in business, I realized that from a legal point of view, it can get long, drawn out, messy, and costly. That's the advice we had from a barrister. So I ended up having to buy the guy out. To find every single day after that, him throwing other bombs at us. You know, we had a break-in where all of our hard drives and data had been ripped out. We couldn't prove it was him, but we kind of knew. But you don't expect people to behave that way. We had him go to our existing suppliers to offer them more money to work for his new business. So we had to re-engineer our route to market. But all of that, 3 years, and then everything that followed, was a test of who I am. And I realized integrity was worth more than anything else to me. I'd borrowed up to the hilt. I'd racked up my credit cards. But what I was able to do is continue to be me and sleep each night. And through that journey, we turned the business around and we eventually sold it off. And that was the start of me becoming a coach and a mentor way back in 2009, where I got the opportunity to become a mentor and I immediately said yes. Why? Because I knew in those difficult moments, if I had had somebody outside of my box, my bubble, who I could be vulnerable with, who I could authentically talk about the challenges and the opportunities, somebody who could hold a mirror up to me and say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Because when you're in business, when you're in these moments, the emotion clouds your judgment. And so having that objective third party is the role I play quite often. And I've helped countless people navigate their journeys better, not because of my wisdom, but because of my experience and my ability to hold up the mirror and help them join the dots up. So that's where it started, Zoran.
Wow. What a hero's journey is that, huh? How inspiring.
I don't know if I feel like a hero, but I feel that was the moment I realized where my worth was, where my purpose was.
Yeah, no, I know that it's not the hero's journey in that sense that you're a hero, but in the hero's journey that I usually talk to our audience, there is this journey of temptation, transformation, pain, getting into the betrayal, getting into understanding of who you are, getting out of integrity, getting into integrity. It's so important sometimes that people know that we all need to go through this to emerge into your purpose, right? So when you sit in front of the leaders or somebody that you coach, you think, oh, well, find your purpose. It's very easy. But sometimes we do need to go to struggle, right? To be able to emerge.
I absolutely agree. I mean, these are the sorts of phrases you see all over the internet, but I truly believe that each person is a gem. Mm-hmm. And, we know in the surrounding world that everything goes through a cycle. There are good times, there are bad times, there are difficult times. But knowing that's what to expect and becoming more attuned to navigating that on an even level is where I try to take my life and help others do that. Mm-hmm. Help businesses really go down to purpose and meaning as opposed to operational activity. People become so, I guess, engrossed in the day-to-day firefighting and making those operational decisions that they forget to be human. They lose touch of who they are where they get the purpose and meaning. And I try to help people authentically build businesses, to take decisions objectively with compassion, and acceptance that you can make the best plans in the world, but you can't control everything. So definitely plan, but learn to navigate those challenges as they come. And how do you do that in a composed, structured way?
And how do you do this in a composed and structured way? Is this part of your models? Is that what is kind of leading us into that?
Sure. Let me give you that example, if I may. So, as I say, life for me has been like this. And I think it's like that for most people, whether they show that on their mask or not.
Exactly. All of us, I guess.
All of us, right? So let me give you an example that hopefully people can relate to. So way back in 2022, early 2020 rather, we know what happened back in early 2020. And I was one of those people who was forward looking. I could scan the environment and know that this pandemic, this monster was coming towards us. I have an amazing brother, doctor out there in Australia who was closer to the action, and he was telling me weeks in advance, Sanjiv, you need to prepare for lockdown, which is a term I'd never heard of before. But I said, okay, so what do I need to do? I came down one morning, spoke to my family, I'm going off to the hardware shop, told them what I was doing, and they went, hang on a second, you're over-exaggerating, you're getting a bit carried away. And I said, listen, what's the worst that's going to happen? This is a lesson in business. You prepare for the worst, and if the worst doesn't happen, that's okay, that's great, but prepare. So I did that. I was ready about January, early February. But this is where fate and the rest of the world comes to conspire. I had a maternal uncle who had been terminally ill for 4 years. And that first week of March in 2020, he became ill. Again, went back into hospital. And that happened to be his last days on this planet. I was regularly seeing him over those years, and I was making sure I was there every single day. But I also knew that this contagion was coming, and it was dangerous to be around people in public. So as part of that whole journey, I remember saying to my family, listen, for the funeral invite, we should tell people who are old, frail, to avoid attending. And people decide these things on emotion. And despite being wonderful people, intelligent people, in that moment, they kind of took offense to that approach. And they said, no, people will make their own judgments and decisions. And for me, I had to then make my decision. Do I expose myself, my parents who lived with me, to come to this or not, to this funeral? We went to the funeral, and a couple of days later, as fate would have it, myself, my family, my wife started getting that fever. Those fevers that people were talking about and that we were watching in the news, that I was watching day in, day out about body bags, I sensed that it entered our home. And over the next few days, it unraveled through my home. My kids got it. There was no support, no understanding of what to do with this. So I was fighting, trying to keep a lid on it, because in my traditional family, my role was as the protector. Many people may relate to this. Your role as a leader is you're supposed to know what to do. You're supposed to be the one in charge and staying calm. And through that journey, I got worse and worse and worse, but my focus was on getting information as best as I could initially, to see what is this, how is this, but there's lots of different conflicting messages going around. But as I got more ill, I started to tune out, because watching this thing was just making me worse. So then I just started focusing on what I could control. And that was controlling my breathing, my breath, my whatever I could take to sustain this. I ended up in an ICU unit. My father went the day before, 12 hours before me. I ended up in a different ICU unit. And I remember being there and the consultant saying, I've seen this many times. And the good news is that you qualify for intubation. Now, that didn't sound like good news to me at the time. But somehow, I was composed enough to go focus on the moment, focus on this moment, each moment at a time. And somehow I managed to turn that around and battle out of it. At the same time, I got news that my father was on his last hours. I wasn't going to see him again. But I was able to accept that, because I'd done the best I could up until that, all the way through. And a lesson for me is every day, every moment, be present for the people that are important to you. And then I was able to let go. I came out of there with a real clarity that I want to make something positive out of this. I was still battling the journey from coming out of hospital. A month later, my heart rate would race at 130 beats per minute. Just sitting there, if I was talking to you, it would be like a rev counter sticking. and it wouldn't come down. Those who have suffered that would know what that feels like. In the days and weeks and months afterwards, even now, elements of long COVID, the brain fog, hit you. But learning to go accept it, tune it, figure out what you can do about it, but don't let it take over how you're thinking. So I came up with a model. I was asked to do a TED talk following this. And for those who take the time to watch it, you'll see I'm struggling to breathe. But I was determined to give something in the moment that was relevant to the people listening at the time. So I came up with a model, the 3Rs model: reflect, reframe, reset. And I think everybody can use this, whether it's in the business world, your personal life, or strategically. Reflect is like watching. I give you the example of business where I was in business and I was stuck in the emotion of it and I couldn't see the wood for the trees. I say to all of us that when we're observing something, as an observer, we are really smart. We see everything, like watching a movie. So imagine sitting in the cinema seat, watching this movie play out. You can see the journey they've been on. You can see the characters and how they're interacting. You can see the blind spots. And quite often you can say, look, there's different trajectories you can take. Don't make this hard for yourself. So that's the reflecting stage of it. And then seeing those dots and joining up differently. So in any set of circumstances, we should know that we have a choice. And seeing those dots allows us to see those different choices and patterns. And then it's up to us to decide a different perspective. It's like looking up at the stars and saying, that's a bear, that's a plow. You know, people look up and imagine these patterns and they see them. And we can see those patterns differently in our lives and say, in this set of circumstances, how can I make the best of this situation? So you reframe. And then after deciding to choose a different path or different approach, you let go of where you've been and you reset, and then you go again. So it's a reflect, reframe, reset. And I believe that can be useful. I mean, from the feedback I've had from young people going through their journey to people much later in life and in business, it really seemed to resonate, because this perspective of life being human applies to all of us. And if we're honest, we all are going to face challenges, small or large. But having the ability to reflect, reframe, and reset, and sometimes reinvent. And I've been through a period of reinvention multiple times, and that's where Sanjiv Speaks came. Off the back of that tragic situation where I lost my father, I'd suffered from COVID and long COVID. People who had been coaching and mentoring for many years said, Sanjiv, you need to be more visible and you need to get out there and speak to people in a bigger way. And that's where Sanjiv Speaks was born.
Thank you so much for that. And I love the model. I think it's such a straightforward model, very easy to comprehend and very easy to accept and apply. So reflect, I really love, how you position it, like us watching the movie or series that we love, and we can see it clearly, right? We can reflect on our life. And reframe, what would be the good language? Because sometimes people are struggling in reframing when they reflect and they see themselves and they really can observe themselves. How they can reframe? Is it reframing the beliefs, perspectives? What is it that you would love people to reframe in those reflective moments?
Part one, let me take it back. When you stand back, the emotion becomes less intense. And that's why I go back to, it depends. The classic answer. Depending on your situation, the circumstance, what kinds of things drive our behavior? Our emotions drive our behavior quite often, right? Or the impact of things then drive our emotions. So it becomes too intense. But being able to stand back and see the whole picture, you may see patterns where your emotional response in the situation isn't helpful. So standing back and seeing that will allow you to make different decisions or choices about seeing something slightly differently. The number of times you may have seen a movie where from this angle, it looks like this, but you look at the same situation from a different angle, it looks different. Choosing to stand back and look at it differently. Because if you don't do that, you're going to play the same tape all over again, right? So your emotions, your choices of the people and the things that you surround yourself with. Quite often, this standing back shows me the relationships, the interactions which are holding me back, perhaps, that I'm hanging on to, or that I don't have the courage to let go of. And that can be anything. And I'm going to say anything. Everything from your personal relationships, the ones that you've had for many years, are they serving you? Have you outgrown those situations and those people? Are you surrounding yourself with people and nutrition and input that's fueling you positively? Or are you feeding your mind and your soul and your environment through things that are toxic and negative? You might not know you're doing it. And in the world of social media and news, I tune out the news. For somebody who does this, I rarely watch the news. I choose what I do and watch and check in on, but I choose to nourish myself with things that will uplift me. And it sounds a bit, I was one of the cynical guys in the young age, what you see is what will become your reality. But I truly believe that, because you start to become more sensitive to the things that are in your mind. It's the red car syndrome, right? Red sports car. You think about a red sports car and then you drive around, you suddenly see a red sports car. People say, don't think of a purple elephant with red spots or pink spots. And what do you think of a purple elephant with red spots or pink spots? In the same way, you nourish your mind with positive thoughts that the future is full of opportunity, that whichever set of circumstances you're in, you are in control and you can overcome it because others have. And if others haven't, you can be the first who can do it. So feeding yourself full of that every day helps you reframe. And creating a space to do that structurally. Zoran, I have a practice that I build in. First in the morning, I ensure that I have no contact with my phone and I have a 10-minute period where I just breathe. Doesn't have to be complicated. And I just focus on my breath, cut out the noise, and think about what I am and what I want to send out to the world today. Whatever happened yesterday, I've reset from it. So each night, I go through this process of evaluating, okay, so what worked, what didn't work? What are the lessons? Take the lessons and the things you can't control, let go of. So that cleanses, it detoxes, and it sets the frame. We talk about an attitude of gratitude. Every morning, I look to send one message to one person from my phone book of why I appreciate them or what I remember about them. Nothing more, nothing less. That has a double benefit. It benefits the person at the other end. But how our psychology works, how neuroscience works, it actually fuels us as well. It makes us realize the positive things in our lives. Now, whatever the fire, like I said, I've given you an example of a couple of the fires or some experience of those fires, but they can become intense. But realizing that, every day is an opportunity. And if you look at every day as an opportunity, you don't react as fear. What's the worst can happen? If you can accept what's the worst can happen, everything empowers you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for that clarification. Now, let's shift our conversation into leadership nowadays, because I know that you work with leaders, and a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast are leaders, small businesses, big organizations, on different levels, and I would really love to explore your perspective on what do you see it's the most important for leaders to embody nowadays. What do you see in this ever-evolving, ever-changing world that feels extremely chaotic from outside? A lot of people are concerned, worried. When you look into the state of the affair of the planet Earth and you look into what's going on, since COVID, you mentioned COVID as well, it's kind of keeps on intensifying. And I always feel that leaders are so important nowadays, more than ever, from my perspective, because they need to be resilient, stable, steady, and so on and so forth. But I'm curious to start with this conversation. What do you feel it's the important thing for leaders nowadays? If to really to set the stage and give our leaders in our community your thoughts around that, what would you say?
It's a wonderful question. I've had a long time to think about what does the world need in terms of leaders? And I can only give you my perspective from my experience. I believe a leader, the model that I've created is a HEALS model. These are the characteristics of a good leader. Historically, a good leader was somebody who was technically competent at a junior level and worked themselves up technically because of their technical expertise to become leaders. But I think the human characteristics of a leader is what's important going forward. So the HEALS model, HEALS. Hate stands for humility. Now, humility is something that I practice daily, not just in the business or leadership world. So a practice I have in the home is when I'm talking to my kids, I make sure there's a time every day where we sit together and we detach our statuses and we talk as people. So humility in the working environment helps you connect with people at a human level. Because it's so easy as we succeed or climb the ladder to forget what it is like for everybody else, or forget what it was like for you in that journey. So humility allows you to listen. Empathy or emotional intelligence, I think, are really important skills or values of a leader of the future. Emotional intelligence is somebody who is that stable person. somebody who is able to see the nuances in communication, the interactions of people, different people. And then somebody who's aware, A for awareness. Now, awareness starts from within. As much as you're a leader, the first person that all of us are leading is ourselves. So having that humility allows us to reflect on ourselves with vulnerability, awareness of ourselves, and then getting help and support to fill in the gaps, if you like, where you see you need development. Then awareness of our environment, our organizational environment, really understanding it rather than sitting at the top and making decisions remotely. Get involved, put in a system where you are actively involved or engaged with people within the organizations in different ways. So you get to be aware of what's really happening, not just what's presented to you on a presentation in a room.
Mm-hmm.
And then the awareness of the wider environment, the world, the business, the competitive environment. So that awareness is absolutely crucial. It's a bedrock. Listening, because it's the next one, HEAL, L for listening. If you have humility, awareness, an attitude of awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and empathy, you can go and listen to people. You can't necessarily fix their problems. I've learned that as well. I'm such an empath. I used to want to fix everybody's problems and take it on myself. Now, life isn't like that. You got to take tough decisions as a leader. But listening allows you to hopefully find different ways of communicating, looking at different opportunities to help others, because a positive culture in the organization, people who have hope are people who are positive. But you can only do that if you're aware of them, if you listen to them, if you understand them as an emotionally intelligent leader, if you're aware of it and you listen. And the very last one for me is about service. A leadership role is not a title, it's a responsibility to serve. And leaders who serve, who have that mindset at the top, and they will build people around them who have that vision, that understanding, that approach. And that, I believe, then permeates down the organization. So leaders, that's my model. A leader is someone who heals, has humility, emotional intelligence, awareness of themselves, the organization, the external environment, someone who listens, tunes into what's important, and somebody whose ultimate purpose is to serve the organization, serve the people. That's my model.
That's a beautiful model. And, like starting from, humbleness, I love that you brought this forward because I think that sometimes we forget. It's simply, as you said, when we climb the ladder, we become super successful, we are where we are and who we are, we forget that precious moment of being humble. And I love, Sanjiv, how you linked humbleness to listening, because sometimes you're absolutely right. I see this in my own work when people are not humble enough, they cannot listen well, and everything from emotional intelligence to awareness. But the most of all, I really would love to bookmark this for our listeners, that service. I think that when leaders really understand that they're service to themselves to begin with, because they need to serve themselves also, then service to their community, which is service to others, service to the business, service to the wider world through the business they conduct, then it becomes a purpose-driven mission instead of just something that you began talking about at the beginning when you shared with us the hardcore cutthroat business models of the past ages when people really don't care and they just treat people with disrespect, and they always use the language, but this is business, just to justify everything because it's just a business. Yeah, I love to hear, no, it's just a business. You know what I mean? It's just a business. Who cares? But what you're calling leaders to do, it's just see that this is not just a business, it's service. It's something wider than themselves, and they are, by engaging in that service, they can really impact other people. So I love that you brought this dimension of service into your model as well, right?
Thank you. I'm hearing more and more from leaders that I speak to, even HR leaders, that they have senior people who are disengaging. And where I see this is, I feel there's a disconnect now in leaders who have come through a certain pathway, see the way they've had to operate through traumatic times, and that purpose is missing. So I have a lot of conversations about how can I help them regain that purpose, tune in. So, I'm a safe space. A lot of people, if they what's Sanjiv? It's a safe space where you can comfortably feel and express and explore. And some magic happens from very simple exercises, but tuning to that purpose. So I try to drive transformation through clarity, authenticity, and purpose. That's my kind of pillars to how I drive transformation. The transformation happens from the people I'm engaging with. I'm just there as a catalyst to help spark those or create space and environments and opportunities for those, that space to try and think differently, to feel again. And when you start to feel again, then you can start to have passion and purpose. So yeah, that's the kind of journey I'm on.
Exactly. And that feeling again, when you have passion and purpose, it's really, really beautiful. I would love to ask you, I mean, not challenging question, but interesting question that I just came to me when you were introducing yourself. Sometimes when I talk to leaders around purpose, and they don't know what purpose is, and they're asking me, but Zoran, how can I find purpose? What is purpose? It's such a spiritual question as well. And in your introduction to yourself, you also mentioned that one of the dimensions of you is that you come from a spiritual background, that you have foundation in spirituality. What is it that it's in your foundation of your own spirituality, in your own spiritual practice, that helps you get in relationship with your purpose to begin with, and then inspired others? Because I see that connection sometimes. I see that when people open up a little bit more to understand that there is a spiritual dimension that we call purpose and meaning in leadership. There is something bigger than life governing our life. There is something that has invites us to have faith, to have trust, to have commitment, to have a relationship with ourselves in different level. It can get a little bit easier to get in this relationship with purpose. You know what I mean? So I'm curious a little bit more about that in your own practice, your spiritual background. What is it in your foundation? How do you use that to support leaders to get in relationship with their own purpose?
So let me say to start off with that my life experience and interacting with so many people has taught me that there's two directions people come to this purpose and this spiritual connection. Some people are born in an environment where there is a deeper meaning. That might be through a particular faith or an acceptance or a cultural acceptance that as humanity, we are the top of the creation tree, if you like. And what differentiates us is something that we are able to question our place in the world, in creation, more than just the norm that every other creature does, which is eating, sleeping, reproducing, and that's it. And then you fall off a cliff and you think, surely there's more to it than that. Then through life experiences, when you interact with people, you start to realize there's an energy. You sense it. You might not call it spiritual, but we all have come across this feeling of there's a positive energy or vibe about this environment. And it can be, they might feel it through a non-spiritual path. They go to a concert and everybody's in this elevated state. Why is it that we are part of that collective organism where we feel part of that energy? We can walk into a room where we suddenly feel at peace and at ease when we've never met somebody, but just the environment and the energy that they're exuding, we experience it for that basic level. But also I would say to people, even if you don't think of it that way, people who feel that they are totally in control of their lives will eventually come across a situation where they have lost control. That despite whatever they think they can do, they come to an acceptance that they are out of control. Not everything in life that they can control. And that can often break people, get them to start questioning themselves. And I feel that's an opportunity as much as a challenge. I was taught by one of my spiritual mentors a metaphor, and I loved it. So imagine a clear glass with clear crystal water in there. And behind it, there's a picture. There's a mountain. If you ask somebody standing there, they'll say, what are you seeing? You're saying, I'm seeing the mountain. Ask somebody else, what do you think? I'm seeing the glass. Ask somebody else, what do you think? You're seeing the water. It's the perspective. But each of us has challenges within us. And he said to me that on the spiritual path, you come at it at a stage when you first come across spirituality as something that's wonderful and energizing. And you think, wow. Mm-hmm. Then as you progress on the spiritual path, it's like shaking that glass. That glass has our nature, our base nature within it, like mud. And when you shake it on the spiritual path, because you question it, you absolutely are forced to look at yourself objectively. And you can be bound and weighed down by that, or you can actually celebrate the fact that you can see it. Because many people walk around ignorantly, oblivious to it. So the impact they have on the world, they're oblivious to. Mm-hmm. And then your challenge then is, through that awareness, to start dealing with it and taking on practices, daily practices, whatever. There's so many things that I can share in terms of exercises. but to start to deal with that base nature of you. And as you can start becoming independent of that base nature, you naturally feel more stable. You naturally feel more calm. And as the waves come and go, the storms come and go, the ability for you to navigate those, as I say, in a smooth way on that ocean journey, becomes clear to you. And so that spiritual connection, I think, as a journey for people, can come from various directions. But for me, spirituality is ultimately, if nothing else, if you realize that your joy shouldn't be about your personal joy, because you can only control a small element of that. But what you can control is what joy you bring to others. And you can do that selflessly. It's even more powerful. So asking people, look, go and do something voluntary somewhere. Do it invisible even. Don't tell anybody about it. Experience that feeling of actually bringing joy to others in a small way. You kind of sit there. It's quite powerful. For me, it's kind of, you do it all the time. But when people are new to volunteering and serving people, they find it really empowering. They start to get meaning and purpose out of stuff. They get perspective out of their lives suddenly again. Because, in this modern world, we've got more gadgets, more tools, more convenient things than ever. But is everybody happier? No, because we get conditioned to this normal. And it's only when you can stand back, and maybe we don't want to get rid of everything, but be in environments where people are living happily with a lot less. Expose yourself to those environments and selflessly serve them. It gives you joy, it gives you energy, and it spreads that joy. And I think, in this purpose, this approach of heals, if you can think of your role in the organization as somebody who's there as a custodian, somebody whose role is to nurture this, bring to it your whole self, while making sure that you're not, taking too much out of your own cup. So you're healing yourself and taking help yourself. I take help myself. I make sure I take practice that feeds my soul as well regularly. Meditation, people talk about it. Some people are scared of meditation because they think it's spiritual and it takes them down the path. It's okay. Meditation is about quieting the mind, first of all. So even if you start the day, each day, with just breathing, that's why I said breathing, because it's a universal language, right? And through my journey of COVID, the power of the breath, I learned like I never learned before, even though I come from a culture of yoga. So I'm in the middle of writing a book, Just Breathe. Going through what you're going through, just breathe.
Breathe, exactly.
Because that is such a powerful way to tune out noise, powerful way to get in touch with yourself, and start to get tuned back into finding your purpose. And people worry too much about what is your purpose. Don't worry about defining it. Tune into where the joy is. Tune into where you feel that who you are, your authentic self, and how you're operating are in resonance. So that congruity. And be vulnerable. Be vulnerable with yourself, if nobody else, to try and cleanse yourself of these base natures, which you all know that we have. Because freeing yourself from that elevates how you feel. If you elevate how you feel, how you come across the world around you is elevated as well. And you spread that.
I think that's a wonderful call for action for all of you who are listening to us today. Tune into that joy and don't worry that much what the purpose is, defining that purpose, because sometimes I see people get stuck in that in coaching. Can I find it? How can I find it? Where is it? How can I lift the rocks to define it? And what Sanjiv is saying to us is follow your joy, really, really relax into that, and that service, selfless service to yourself and others. And I'm happy, Sanjiv, that you mentioned this as well. For a lot of leaders to make sure that they fill their own cup before they serve others, because sometimes people get carried away, especially if they're purpose driven. They burn out because they simply want to give too much and they don't give to themselves. So there's a lot of beautiful learning here to unpack from Sanjiv. So Sanjiv, as we're wrapping up this podcast, any specific call for action that comes naturally for you? If you were to inspire audience in one or two steps that you would love them to do as a result of listening to our podcast today, what would you call them on to do?
I'd ask them to step back, to create space for them to actually reflect on themselves. Find a safe space, find a practice, find help that allows them to step back and start to feel again. Be vulnerable in that situation. And that is the start of progress. However vulnerable and painful and the tears flow, let them flow, because that is the start of your growth journey. And embrace it and fully take it on. And the last message I would say is, my spiritual master, His Holiness Swami Maharaj, I knew him for 30 odd years of my life, regularly touching base with him and getting his guidance. But his life message was, in the joy of others lies our own, in the progress of others rests our own. And if you can tune into that as a daily message, start at home. It doesn't have to be changing the world, but start with the people that are nearest and dearest. And remember, in their joy is your joy. In their progress is your progress.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Desk TNM Coaching Unplugged. It was such a joy and pleasure to be with Sanjiv. Once again, Sanjiv, thank you for joining us. Everybody else, thank you so much for being our guests, for listening, for tuning in, for sharing, and for embracing beautiful messages that we keep on sharing week after week. Bye for now.